But not a lot of people know that actually one of the first rebellions in Nazi-occupied Europe happened in Yugoslavia on 13th of July in 1941. So what's the perception of the role of, at the time, Kingdom of Yugoslavia, which had its internal conflicts already then, in the World War II?
Yes, you're right. I mean, the popular campaigns, it's always the Eastern Front, North Africa, D-Day. The Balkans tends to get overlooked, but of course, actually is very, very important because of the number of troops that Yugoslav resistance fighters tied down. Also, of course, post-war with the Cold War is important because Churchill favoured Tito and the communists rather than the royalist resistant factions, which ultimately, of course, was a problem for the future. And I think people don't understand the sheer scale of the fighting in the Balkans. I mean, obviously a very mountainous part of the world. So a difficult place to fight over, very difficult, harsh, unforgiving terrain, not suited for the Germans, obviously, for armoured warfare. So they had to rely on mountain divisions. And also
they found out.
Sorry?
They found out themselves.
Yes, they found out. Yes, they certainly found out the hard way. And also, as you all know as well as I do, of course, the guerrilla war in the Balkans actually became very, very divisive because you had competing factions within the Balkans, some of which, of course, had sided with Germany. So you got the puppet state in Croatia, which was a fascist state, very, very pro-German. They even provided, as I'm sure you probably know, provided a division to fight on the Eastern Front alongside the Germans. So you had a very, very divisive war in the Balkans, which not only became a war against the German occupation, obviously the Italians were there as well, occupying, certainly to the south, they were in Thrace and Macedonia. So you had this war against the Axis, but there was also, of course, a very rapidly developing civil war amongst the component parts of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, all wanting different things, all fighting for different goals. As I say, Croatia had firmly nailed its flag to the Nazi cause. And of course, what the Germans were the Germans famously raised several security divisions in the Balkans as well, like the SS. But again, that's the other thing is, of course, is that people forget that the Second World War tapped into, as you've said, underlying historic tensions that were already there, and then fed off different nationalisms, people's aspirations for independence. And they did that to a lesser extent in the Soviet Union. I mean, that was one of the failures of Hitler's strategy, was that he did not turn up in places like Ukraine and Belarus and say to them, whether he meant it or not, once we defeated the Red Army, you'll get independence. You'll be free of Moscow. Fight with us and we'll help you. But they never really did that. And by the point that they did do it, the war was firmly against them anyway, so it was too late. So again, in the Soviet Union and in the Balkans, you actually ended up with what were essentially civil wars. Famously in the Soviet Union, of course, resistance against Soviet rule tragically lasted into the 1950s. In the Ukrainian nationalist guerrillas lasted till the 50s, and same in the Baltic states. Again, their resistance lasted, in the forests and in the mountains, lasted until the 50s, until the Red Army had rounded them all up. So the Germans were quite good, I think, certainly in the Balkans, in playing off those historic tensions in order to win allies. But of course, what that meant was the fighting took on a new level, if you like, of quite often, and obviously it fed atrocities. It resulted in numerous atrocities. And also, of course, with the Germans, they tended to have this policy of, if they weren't fighting a regular army, you were terrorists. And they had this sort of policy of going, you kill one of ours, we'll kill 10 of yours. It didn't mean it would be 10 of your fighters, it would be just 10 of your people. They would round up whole villages and execute them. So it what it did was it brought a whole level of barbarity to the war. But as you pointed out earlier, of course, people don't realise the enormous scale of the fighting. I mean, by the end of the war, Tito had something like 300,000 men under arms, and they weren't resistant fighters or guerrillas. By that stage of the war, he pretty much had a conventional army with artillery and tanks. Obviously, it wasn't quite as well equipped as the Allies, but he had this enormous fighting force, which, of course, is when he turned up in northern Italy and decided that he wanted Trieste. There was then a bit of a problem as to whether or not Britain and America would then find themselves fighting with a former ally, because that probably actually is one of the very early stages of the Cold War, because the Allies then found themselves, facing off communist allies whose agenda was not the same as what the British and Americans wanted, or indeed, to be fair, the Italians.
Yeah, and Tito is also one of those people that today he is looked at very unfairly here, because especially today we have this obsession with religious fascism here, and he, as a communist, some people look at them as these crushers of that, which they were. They didn't care for the religious beliefs, and that is not fair to say, but in some sense, if the communists don't do their thing in the Second World War here, maybe these states that we live in today here in Balkans don't exist at all.
We stay genuine, uncensored and unscripted, and we always will, as we have to order our usual. Share us and subscribe us, and stay tuned until the next Wednesday. Iguzo!